The West Australian state budget, which was released on the 13th of May, is what some say a blow to West Australian households. The state government has been accused of revenue raising after the loss of its AAA rating in 2013. The increase in vehicle registration has no plans to implement any strategies, such as a no-fault insurance scheme, which will provide anyone involved in a motor vehicle accident with full medical cover regardless of fault.
The current system, the at-fault system, means that if you're responsible for the accident and you're injured, then you receive initial medical care, but then after that, the long-term medical care you may need, you pay for yourself, which can put great hardships and difficulties on you and your family. Whereas a no-fault scheme doesn't differentiate between those who are at fault or not at fault, and it covers everybody in the accident who's catastrophically injured.
Would you like to see a no-fault insurance scheme implemented in WA?
It's something that Labor seriously would look at, and we'd like to see the final model. But what this government's done is increase cost for motorists again and again and again. And whereas they should have been looking at this proposal, instead they've just increased the costs with no benefit.
By raising vehicle registration by $9.08 per car and abolishing the $36 private vehicle concession, on average the public will pay $45 more for registration when the increase comes into effect on July 1st.
In this budget there's been a series of increases for families across Western Australia. For example, they've removed the concession for the private ownership of motor vehicles, so there's been another $36 impact on motor vehicle owners in Western Australia. We don't agree with it. This is yet just another tax grab.
Unfortunate part of at-fault insurance is that if you're travelling in a car with some friends or family and you're merely a passenger and that car runs off the road and all the occupants of the car are badly injured, the driver is at fault and therefore the driver isn't covered by our current scheme, but his or her passengers are. Now that can then mean that the passengers need to sue the driver to regain certain costs within their accident and the scheme, and so that then leads to other angst amongst those family members and a lot of unnecessary stress, whereas the no-fault scheme wouldn't have that sort of implication. And an at-fault scheme tends to lead to litigation because you're constantly having to prove that you weren't at fault, and therefore if liability is denied by the insurer, ICWA or the Insurance Commission of Western Australia, you need to then take them to court to prove that you weren't responsible. So that's where litigation costs start to go up, because you're always constantly having to prove your innocence, for want of a better term, within the accident.
Western Australia is the only state yet to introduce a no-fault insurance scheme, adding to concerns the government will have to raise vehicle registration fees again if a no-fault insurance scheme is implemented.
Unfortunately, one of the ways that's been discussed to implement no-fault insurance is to actually raise car registration fees. Now, this means that if the government wants to implement no-fault insurance and goes down the pathway of raising registration fees, they've given a double raise, and that isn't going to go over as well with the public as what it may have done if it had been implemented at this point, and probably could have been implemented quite well. I think the government needs to try and raise its revenue any way it can at the moment, particularly with all the projects it has on the go, and so they found an easy way to do that in raising car registration.
They have no long-term strategy to manage the finances. So in this year we saw an extra $1 billion in extra taxes being raised by the government. This extra $1 billion is trying to deliver surpluses. They're trying to retain the AAA credit rating, but they can't because they simply can't manage the finances.
Kate Barnard for Undercurrent.